Welcome everybody. Welcome to the people here in the room and the one participating online. This is the last event of this 3 days workshop on future vision on science communication. And we will talk about open access. But we will do it, we will focus a bit. And we will do it through JHEP, looking at JHEP, that is Journal of High Energy Physics, which celebrates this year its 25th anniversary. Journal of High Energy Physics was launched here in CISA in 1997. Those years, I mean, the open ceremony this year, our director, actually, Professor Romanino, gave us a bit of an intro of what was going on in CISA back at that time. There were the archive, no? You have already heard these days talking about archive. And of course, they were in Los Alamos, but also at CISA, some preprint repository was in place, and then they merged and they moved to Los Alamos. But it was those years where CISA was really experimenting new ways of sharing knowledge, scientific knowledge, of course. And so in 1997, a Journal of High Energy Physics was launched, and it was both, I think, visionary and pioneering. Why I say visionary? Because back in 1997, not many people were talking about open access. No, now open access and open science is in the mouth of everybody, and everybody talks about it at conferences. But back then, it was really something very niche. And so in that sense, it was visionary. And the visionary was also, if you want, but to a different extent, the fact that it had to be a journal by scientists for scientists, so really strongly connected to the scientific community. And pioneering in which sense? Because at least in the hard science, it was the first online-only journal. I mean, internet. I mean, there was an issue that was dated back at 95. Can we say that 95 is it a good date for the birth of internet? Or 94, 95, something like that. Those years. 97 is not much after that, right? So talking about an online-only journal was something new. But not only that, I mean, it was, of course, it had strong ties with the archive. So it was possible to submit directly from the archive to the journal. And so there was these strong ties. And another thing that I think was pioneering back then is that there was an algorithm that when the paper was submitted to the journal, assigned the paper to an editor. Nowadays, there are even more sophisticated systems, AI doing that. But again, back then, it was pioneering, I would say. So, as I said, the idea was to offer an open access journal to the scientific community. And after 3 years, the journal already published, I mean, in its third year, the journal published a bit more than 300 papers. So the first year, I think, less than 100, the second year, something between 100 and 200, the third year, something between 300 and 400, so on and so forth. But it kept on growing. And if you look at now, what we publish now, we have something between 2,500 and 3,000 papers published per year. So there is a factor, almost a factor of 10 from the beginning until now. And and this is reflected. So if it, at the beginning, it was, I would say, an artisanal endeavor with a couple of people working on it, with temporary contracts. It was even not clear what was the, I mean, they were not researchers, they were not from the administrative team. So it was a problem to really label them and to find the proper contract type. But okay, then after JHEP grew, after JHEP, other journals were launched, and you are talking about JCAP, Journal of Cosmology and Astroparticle JSTAT, Journal of Statistical Mechanics, JCAP, JINST, Journal of Instrumentation, and JCOM. We have heard about JCOM. There was yesterday a panel about that. Journal of Science Communication. So more people got involved, and more structure was needed. And stability. And in those years, in 2005, I think, CISA Media Lab was founded. Now CISA Media is the company owned by CISA that is looking after the journals, let's say, okay, taking care of the journals. And now CISA Media Lab has 27 employees. 16 of them work directly on the journals. Then you have administration, IT, and science communication. But 16 of them, so that more than half of them, work directly on the journal. So this process had to face the problem of this, what I call the sustainability issue. So if at the beginning it was CISA covering for the costs, I don't know if it was through an European project or not, or in other ways, but I sort of had in my mind that it could be the case, that there was an European project that CISA applied for to have the money to cover this. But anyway, after a couple of years, no, I mean, it became clear that something more stable had to be placed, and so we approached a publisher. A publisher was approached, Institute of Physics published, so IOPP, and an agreement was signed with them, and the journal published for several years in the traditional subscription model. But of course, the idea, the vision to have the open access journal was not abandoned. It was still close to the heart of the people running the journal, of CISA. And so in 2008, so we are talking about 10, 11 years after this life, I mean, some institutional membership fees were introduced to open its content, at least partially. In 2010, the partnership with IOPP ended and started a new partnership with Springer. And Springer at that time was embracing open access, was really playing an important role in that area. And this partnership with Springer actually turned out to be instrumental to set up Scope 3. What is Scope 3? Scope 3 is a consortium sponsoring open access in particle physics. So there are more than 60 countries involved in this consortium, more than 3,000 institutes among libraries, funding agencies, research institutes, intergovernmental organizations, and like that. So it is since 2014 the JHEP is fully open access under this Scope 3 umbrella, let's say, consortium. Now, after this brief introduction of the history of JHEP, I want to introduce you the panelists that are here with me today, and I will follow an alphabetical order. And let me introduce you Eva Babonich. Eva Babonich is the head of the Abdus Salam International Center, ICTP, of the ICTP library. Previously, she was responsible for the library in Graz, the Technical University of Graz. And she will, I'm very happy she's here because she will bring the point of view of librarians. She will tell us what happened in the last 20 years to libraries. We have Maria Bellantone sitting at the other corner of the table. She's a scholarly communication expert. Now she is working at EURAC research, but previously she has been working in publishing for Nature Materials. You were an editor of Nature Materials. You have been an editor at Springer. You were following, among other things, all the EPJ journals, right? Or some of them at least. And then you became at F1000 director of the Physical Sciences journals. And F1000 is a publisher that played and is playing an important role in the open access arena. It is one of the few, one of the publishers that was founded in the last 10 years, I would say. Okay, we have, you can see on the screen, Giulia Zanderighi. Professor Giulia Zanderighi is the director of the Max Planck Institute for Physics in Munich, and she's also a member of the editorial board of JHEP. So, and finally, we have Professor Fabius Wirner, who is professor of theoretical physics at the University of Padua. And he is also editor of JHEP. And besides bringing the scientific, community point of view, the point of view of scientists, for sure he can share with us, he will share with us his experience as vice president of the ERC, the European Research Council, because he has been a member of it until he was vice president until 2020, so not that long ago. So I would like actually to start from you, Fabio, because you published pretty in the early times of JHEP. You joined the editorial board early on, and so I would like, perhaps you can tell me what the impact of JHEP has been in the HEP community, and if and how it changed the publishing landscape in that community.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes. So, well, before answering your precise question, I'll try to put it in context, referring to my own personal experience. So, I wrote my master thesis in Padua in 1981, and I remember that I wrote it on a mechanical typewriter, and to do calculations, I was punching cards. Then in 10 years, many things happened. By the end of the 80s, we had video terminals. There was tech that was very important because it became accepted in our community as the standard way of typesetting papers. And the internet started at the end of the 80s. I remember I was in Berkeley, and then in the probably in 1990, it was replaced by the World Wide Web. Then another big revolution of those times was the archive that started in August 1991. And indeed, it was very rapidly under the initiative of Paul Ginsberg, but also at CISA, there were important efforts, and there was an important role of CISA in being a mirror of the archive and also in making sure that the archive policy would be coordinated worldwide instead of being dominated by one region of the world. And I remember my first paper on the archive was just a few months later in March 1992, and the archive grew very rapidly in the whole community of high energy physics. At that time, there was a question asked, will the archive replace the journals? I remember some famous colleagues of mine that for some time were not sending papers to journals any longer. Well, in mathematics, we have the famous example of Perelman, but much later, winning the Fields Medal with a paper just on the archive without publication in a scientific journal. Well, that idea was eventually abandoned for various reasons that I will elaborate upon maybe later in this discussion. So, what's the added value of a physics journal and what influences its success? Well, in the end, the vision of Daniele Amati and those around him who created JHEP, Loiano Borora, Marco Fabbrichesi, Fabrizio Nesti, and many others, was that the added value of a scientific journal is the quality of its peer review. And at those times, there were dominating positions on the market by as famous and well-established Elsevier journals, Nuclear Physics B, Physics Status B, etc. And already then, even before the recent discussion on open access, there was the feeling that their costs were unjustified because most of the cost was not coming from the peer review. And Daniele Amati was starting from a position, from a very good position to take the leadership in this effort, because he had left CERN not long before, and he had very strong connections with scientists all over the world, being himself a very important scientist in the field of string theories and many other fields. So he could count on a wide network of leading scientists in high energy physics, both as editors and also as first contributors to the journal, because as for prizes, the first who publish or the first to get a prize give the quality, the tone of a journal or of a prize. So in the first 6 months, there were very few papers. It was mentioned before, but they were authored by some of the leading theorists of the epoch. Witten, Mike Green, Seiberg, Doc Schitzer, Brian Weber, Ashok Sen, Townsend, and others. So this gave rise to a very fast rise of the journal, and it convinced also people like me to contribute early to the journal. I was submitted a paper with Brignole and Ferruglio already in November 1997. And just for curiosity, I looked at how fast the journal was rising, just looking at the November month of some years. In that November, there were 4 papers submitted to JHEP. In 1998, there were 27. In 1999, 37. In 2043. In 2003, 71. And it went on raising until the numbers that were quoted before. And this rise in the number of publications, of course, called for an enlargement of the editorial board, and that was the opportunity for me to be invited to the editorial board of JHEP in 2003. Now, coming to your questions, to conclude, let me comment on the impact that JHEP had and the reasons for its success. I think in 2 words, the 2 key words, 4 indeed, but is by scientists for scientists. That is also written in some of the JHEP documents. Well, there was an electronic format from the beginning, both for the journal, but also for the authors and the editors, with a timely interpretation of the technological and sociological revolutions that I described before. The journal provided the first disruptive alternative to the established journals of that time that I mentioned before, and eventually it became a winning model. It could count on the strong, I mentioned the editorial board before my arrival, so I can say that it could count on a strong and wide, both geographically from all over the world and thematically editorial board. And it had an innovative cost model. At the beginning, in the pioneering days, there were donors only. CISA, maybe this European grant that you were mentioning, also INFN contributed for some time. Then there was an intermediate period as a subscription journal, with a transition to open access that culminated in becoming a gold open access journal under the Scope 3 agreement since 2014. Of course, something that helped in this was also that our community of high energy physicists is very international and can count on CERN as a worldwide hub, not only for experimentalists, but also for theorists. Yeah. Another reason for success was an acceleration of the time for reviewing the papers. Well, if I have still 1 minute, sure. I will mention some open questions that maybe we can take up in the discussions at the end of this round table. Does JHEP need further evolution after 25 years, or should it stick to its successful model? For example, there are newcomers in the field like SciPost, who have no cost for authors, but this is at the price of having a sort of peer witness refereeing on a voluntary basis. Should JHEP contemplate the possibility of updating and versioning the papers even after acceptance? Is becoming the scope of JHEP too tight for the present times? I mean, for example, experimental physics is a part of JHEP with excellent editors, but is not among the quantitatively strong contributions to JHEP. There is sometimes there are some problems with the community writing Monte Carlo programs that act as a bridge between theory and experiment. There was the birth of JCAP with 2003 that, of course, eroded some of the boundaries of JHEP. So this just to mention a few points for later.
Thank you, Professor Svirner. I would like actually to ask more or less do we still have Giulia connected? Yes, because I cannot see her.
Yes.
You are still with us. Maybe you feel like to add something or to share your personal, let's say, relation with the journal.
Well, okay, Fabio already said so much. What I can say is I looked it up. The first paper I published was in 2000, and it was in JHEP. And since then, I really published by far the majority of the papers I published has been in JHEP. And at the time, so for me, somehow JHEP has always been there as a journal. But I remember that there was the feeling that this is a new journal, it's a modern journal, innovative. And yeah, so I think what Fabio already said, what made JHEP so successful, done by scientists for scientists. So this also simplicity of the web page is something that we appreciate as it's very good for authors, for editors. Now I see it, and yeah, I think it's been I think the journal I have the closest connection to, let's say, At the time, I remember when I was a student also, of course, this was driven by Pino Marchesini. He was also a big fan of JHEP. And so I somehow, throughout my scientific life, it has been there. And it's been the best journal, I have to say, to work with, from all possible point of views, from author, referee, editor. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say. I will be just brief.
Thank you. Thank you, Giulia. Thank you. So we heard that actually it seems that the scientists, at least that have talked on today at this table, seems to confirm that JHEP succeeded in sticking to the principle of being a journal by scientists for scientists. And that is, maybe I would like to ask Maria Bellantone, from the larger, let's say, publishing point of view. Now we have talked about the high energy physics community, but if you put it in the perspective of a larger community, what do you think has been the impact of JHEP in the larger, broader publishing arena, and what could be the lessons that should be learned by this experience, according to you?
In the history of JHEP, there's been many firsts, and so that's why JHEP is a really good journal to look at, and it gives some lessons more generally, I think, for editors and authors, for publishers, for librarians. The most significant point, I think, is that JHEP had an ambition to be open access right from the beginning. And we are talking about very early days. And this ambition couldn't be really fulfilled initially. We were in very different conditions, business-wise, but also in terms of culture of the community and the situations of that moment. But actually, even through the years when JHEP couldn't be open access, they kept this ambition and they stuck with it until finally they found a way to realize it. And in fact, the presence of JHEP in the set of journals selected by Scope 3 was crucial. And actually the fate of Scope 3 and JHEP are really tied together. Now we have to put it into context, because at that moment when open access rose on the horizon, it rose really from the biomedical community, and it was, for the other disciplines of science, more of a nice to have, but not a must. Certainly it wasn't a priority, and especially if it meant pay. So that could have been a problem. But also there was this problem that, biomedicine had a strong argument, because the open access of those papers was perceived as impacting immediately on the health of people, while here we're talking about a field that is rather pure research, and immediate avenues for translation from research into applications are very rare and not easily envisaged. So there was really a conviction in energy physics, in physics and particle physics, that open access was the right thing to do, because sharing, wide sharing of scientific knowledge was good for everybody, and it was the real way to realize a circulation of knowledge. And physics knowledge was as important as biomedical knowledge. So this is really a very, culturally speaking, a very important view of your own science. I think it's also, at that moment, the concept of diamond open access, of which we talk about today, it didn't exist. But now there are, for example, there's two European Commission funded projects to develop diamond open access. Now we're talking about journals that are in a situation very similar to.
Maybe you can explain what diamond open access is compared to other form of open access, such that.
So what we normally refer to open access is gold open access, what we generally know. Diamond open access is more recent, and it refers to a model in which the reader doesn't have to pay to read the content, but also the author doesn't have to pay. So the funding for the publishing of the papers comes from some other place. So it's a situation where, right now we have a big cohort of journals, especially in humanities and social sciences, that are mostly they are based at universities or academic institutions, just like JHEP was. So they find themselves in a very similar situation, and if they want to scale up, they are facing very similar challenges, and their sustainability at the moment is really a big question mark. And that's why even the European Commission has created, is funding projects to see, to find a way to support these sort of grassroots initiatives. So I think for them, there would be a lot to learn from how, from the history of JHEP. And also from the story of Scope 3, which is very important, because the idea that open access could be financed by the same institutions that were buying the subscriptions, so the libraries and the sort of coming from the universities, so from the academic budget, was at the time new. And it was something that actually came from a group of physicists, and also they were physicists, and there were also some information management experts from the library at CERN. And back in 2007, they initially started writing about these concepts, in which open access, in which the outputs, the papers from the energy physics and particle physics, high energy physics and particle physics community had to be open. So they decided to select a number of journals, the most important journals for them, and JHEP was already one of them. So we're talking about now 10 years from the foundation. And they decided that they also wanted a kind of open access that was equitable and that was easy for authors. Authors didn't have to worry about how to pay it. So they really hatched a plan, and they demanded, in a way, they went to the publishers of these journals, who actually, well, in the case of JHEP, it was owned by CISA, but in the other journals' cases, it was quite a hard negotiation, because they had to go to Elsevier, they had to go to Springer. Actually, one of the hardest to convince was the American Physical Society. surprisingly. And so they, in a way, they invented Diamond Open Access. That was the first example of it, without really, that it wasn't called that way then. And I don't know, nowadays, I don't know if they actually are drawing inspiration from Scope 3, but there is a model that some publishers are experimenting right now, which is called Subscribe to Open. And it has some resemblance with what Scope 3 did. And there is annual reviews, who's now launched journals in this modality. The Amsterdam University Press, EDP Science, and the Greuter. So it's becoming more and more interesting for publishers to experiment with this open access business models not based on article processing charges. It's like JHEP.
Actually, we'll come back later on in the discussion about the different ways to have this transition to open, and the Subscribe to Open is certainly, at least for mid-size publisher, a very interesting one, I think. But we will come back to that later on. But now I want to ask Eva to. We have seen that the publishing landscape really changed dramatically. I mean, Fabio, in the last 30 years. But let's say libraries as well. Could you please help us understanding what libraries went through, let's say, the last 30 years, I would say, and in the emerging setting, let's say open access, what could be the role of libraries?
Libraries, as we deal with scientific literature, we have also been affected, of course, by these changes going on. So I think one of the most important or most influential changes was the transition from print to digital that really affected most of the libraries. Because what happened in a traditional library, everything was based on print. So really, like, the essence of the library was the print collection. We had print books, print journals. They were placed in a well-defined space, the library, right? So where everybody could come, library users would borrow books, they would read, photocopy journal articles, and so on. And also the traditional library services were totally focused on the collection. So we were, all the services and also the workflows within the library were kind of following, as we call it, like the way of the book. So we had acquisition, we had cataloging, indexing, of course, offering loan services, that'd be somebody really to, hand out the books. We were, of course, also helping all the users with finding the material that they were looking for, also within the library space. And so when everything changed to become digital, we really had to question, there were fundamental questions to be asked. What to do with the library space if the collection is downloadable, right? So what about, do we really need a loan desk anymore? When readers don't come to us because everybody can download things from home, right? So services, workflows were becoming redundant or less important. And so many universities and also research institutions started to ask, do we still need a library at all? Mm-hmm. Could it be taken over by the IT services because everything is digital anyway? So why would we need libraries? Do we still need them? So my answer to that is a clear yes. Yes, we do need libraries. But of course, in a very different form. They have to change and adapt to the developments that are going on. So when it comes to the collection, of course, we still have a collection, but it's more and more becoming more and more digital. So we will have to offer location independent access for our users, because we know that you, the scientists, you most of the time, you're not on campus, you're traveling, you want to access from wherever you are. So we want to offer high quality scientific resources with location independent access. When it comes to the library space, yes, it's still needed, but it's not the traditional library space where you go to and you read in quiet. But maybe you want to use the library for having a Zoom call, scheduling spontaneous meetings with your peers. Maybe you want to book your room via your mobile phone using the online catalog of the library, and so on and so on. So we want to have really, for us, the library, or for me, the library space is really a space for creative thinking that has drastically changed and has not much to do with the traditional library space. And when it comes to the services, I think we have to develop really from focusing on the collection and offering collection-based services to focusing on the user and offering user-based services. And that for me is research support services. So I think that the role of the library in the future should be to really take away as much of the burden that scientists have with, for example, administrative tasks, and answer questions when it comes to like publishing, modern forms of publishing. So whenever you as a scientist want to publish open access, the library should be able to help you with that instantly and answer the questions. How can I publish open access? Where can I publish open access? What about funding? Is this a predatory journal? Is it a trustworthy journal? What about academic identity management? Do I need ORCID? What is it? How can I get one? How can I raise my visibility and even the impact of my scientific work? So I think this is what the library should do. And also, of course, we should support you with publishing open access. We should also offer the technical infrastructure for publishing open access in the green way, for example, right? For uploading, hosting preprints or postprints, if the publisher allows that. And you should not have to worry, may I upload the postprint that I've, published with the journal? The library should take care of that. So you shouldn't have to worry about that. And I think the libraries should also become safeguards of a truly open infrastructure for high-class academic publishing. So this is also what Maria said when it comes to, for example, diamond open access, right? So we should also support consortia like Scope 3, or also small initiatives like SciPost, or like MIT Press has Direct Open, for example. And I think that what libraries will need to do in future is to do much more networking, not only amongst libraries, but also really have a proactively approach, of course, publishers, but also the faculty and also funders. So really that we really can design our services really to the demand of our library customers.
Thank you, very interesting indeed. I would like now to open a bit, to make a 2 steps backward and look at, move a bit away from JHEP, and look more in general at this open access movement that has been growing in the last 20 years. And if I have to think about an institute that played really a crucial role in promoting open access in Europe, at least over the past 20 years. I mean, one of the first that comes to my mind is the Max Planck Society. And we have here the director of the Max Planck Institute of Physics. So, Giulia, maybe you can, let's say, tell us a bit what is the Max Planck Society approach to open access and the Max Planck vision on open access. We know there are different ways to open access can be reached in many different ways: green, gold, diamond, all the sorts of colors we may think of. How the Max Planck Society thinks the full open access, full accessibility to scientific content should be achieved?
Okay, yes, well, it's a complicated question, but yeah, so in Germany, the Max Planck Society certainly played a key role in this somehow smooth transition in going from subscription-based journals to open access in different forms, and really for the benefits of science. Now, we just heard about the importance also at the transition that happened at the same time in going from print journals to digital. And one of the key things within the Max Planck Society was, in fact, the creation of what is called the Max Planck Digital Library. So this is somehow, it's a library centralized, responsible to help all Max Planck scientists, so to provide information, basic information about the options and possibilities. But mainly the role of the Max Planck Digital Library has been to act as a central facility also to negotiate agreements with various publishers. And this, of course, negotiating centrally makes you in a much stronger position to better negotiate, essentially. And so if we look at the situation now, I mean, there are really agreements with many publishers, but still really not all of them. So if we look at what is happening in the past years, there are always more and more agreements are being signed, but the process is by far not really finished. One, of course, of the hard negotiations has been with Elsevier. Here there are no agreements yet. And so here there was a hard decision also to simply stop subscriptions, to really try to be in a stronger position to negotiate, of course. So what is the vision? I'm not sure what is the vision on a long-term scale, but certainly it's a process that has started. It's still a process that is not by far not finished. The goal is clear. The goal is that to make science accessible to everybody, the papers, but also the accompanying results published with papers. And so I don't know. I mean, Max Planck is in Germany has a key role, also a role model, I think, in terms for other institutes. And yeah, I think that the importance of this digital library centralized, somehow being together, united, certainly is what where Max Planck was leading in Germany.
Thank you, Giulia. And because you mentioned the Max Planck Digital Library, that actually goes along with what Eva mentioned as well, the need of also infrastructure in that sense. And later on, perhaps we can touch the point of, because beside open access, there is a larger movement that is open science, that is now also the main difference. I mean, open access making giving access to scientific content, but open science means not only giving access to articles that are published, but also to data, to software that have been used to produce data or to analyze data, to, I mean, let's say, or for example, to make open the peer review and to give, let's say, credit to the people that are involved in the peer review. All this, I mean, we will eventually touch later on this point. It needs infrastructure. I don't know. Are you aware of some infrastructure or something that the Max Planck Society is working on to promote, as they did with the Max Planck Digital Library, to promote open access, something towards open science more in general? Are you aware of some initiatives that are taking place at the Max Planck?
Yes, so I'm not aware of concrete initiatives, but certainly this is a big topic under discussion. Also in general, how to have open data, open software, and also to provide, okay, of course one needs to provide also facilities where to store all this data. So this is under discussion, I would say, at the moment. And,
okay. So, Fabio, you have been the vice president of the ERC until 2020. And in general, in Europe, there has been the continent, if you want, that pushed stronger towards open access. And I mean, perhaps from that perspective, as the vice president of the ERC, you can share with us what have been or highlight the main achievements and the remaining challenges from your point of view, or even mistakes or discussion that took place in the recent years that can enlighten, let's say, future decisions.
Yes, I will try, although I'm not an expert in open access, and this is a very complicated and controversial subject. But of course, open access was central to many discussions in the ERC. There was a permanent working group on open access inside the ERC, and the general principle of open access has always been strongly supported by the ERC. Still, there is an important lesson on open access that I learned while I was at the ERC. There is a huge diversity among different scientific communities. We are mostly familiar with the community of physicists, but that was ready for open access. In a sense, apart from some technical details in the definition, even before the archive, there was a worldwide distribution of preprints that was keeping everybody informed about scientific research. It was not accessible to everyone because very few institutions could afford sending preprints to all institutions in the world, but that was overcome by the archive that with minimal cost became accessible to anyone who had a connection to the internet. It was also helped in the transition to the current models of open access by the fact that the international community of particle physicists is very coherent, in the organized overall continents with a strong worldwide hub as CERN. This made possible the Scope 3 agreement, that is widespread agreements with almost complete geographical extension. Now, in other fields is different, and there are some questions that we have to ask ourselves. For example, I became convinced that top-down measures with an idea of a one-size-fits-all are not working. Perhaps, despite the good intentions and some positive effects that were obtained, there were some problems in the Plan S initiative as it was carried out. As open access really lowered the costs, the publishing costs for the scientific community, concerning the case in which single institutions of authors pay article publication charges, isn't there an intrinsic conflict of interest, and that privileges richer authors and institutions with respect to others? What happens, especially if you negotiate locally transformative agreements at the best at the national level, as in Germany, or even at a smaller scale of single institutions? What happens to the weaker communities, geographically weaker in countries with less income and less resources devoted to research, or weaker scientific fields that cannot count on rich grants, like some fields in the humanities, mathematics, especially and young scientists in some cases. Also, there was an effect on the publication of the learned societies that sometimes were using the subscription fees to pursue their policy, also in terms of fellowships and aiding the young scientists. So these are all problems that are still open. In a sense, I would have loved a Europe-wide initiative to have or even worldwide, but try to be more realistic, a Europe-wide initiative to have in each field, and maybe with timing commensurate to the level of development towards open access of each field, transformative agreements of the whole of Europe with publishing companies, not of one country at a time, or even worse, one institution at a time. And well, in some fields, I see also a fragmentation of repositories.
Mhm.
Archive was lucky because it was accepted immediately by everyone in that field. And so we have only essentially one repository for all high energy physics, apart from one very minoritarian repository that probably doesn't fit the standards that we are used to in scientific publishing. There is, well, one problem that is under discussion and that probably is essential in completing the transition to open access is the current initiative on reforming research assessment. In a sense, one should recognize that there are valuable products of research that are not in the form of publications. They are in the form of instruments, they are in the form of computer programs, they are in many other forms. And this doesn't subtract, of course, to the value of publication, just it enlarges the scope. And finally, well, the problem of predatory journals was mentioned. And in the transition of open access, we should pay a lot of attention to the risks. There is the problem of quality control through a serious peer review, and also public perception of science. We have seen through the COVID pandemic, for example, how much fake science or not sufficiently peer-reviewed science was given to the public to claim one thing or the other. So these are the unsolved problems I see, despite the valuable progress that has been made in the last years.
Yeah. Actually, you raised a lot of interesting questions, and I'm curious to see, to hear what, for example, Maria later on will tell us about. I mean, from the publishing point of view, how some of these questions have been addressed or not. But before coming to you, actually, I want also to ask Eva. I mean, as you all know, ICTP is a member of the UNESCO and so the United Nations, and which recently released an open access policy. I mean, perhaps you can tell us a bit about this document and what UN, what is going on under the UN umbrella in the EU, and what has been done to or can be done to promote open access, what is the approach, what is the, again, the vision, and the challenges that actually, if you can also, besides explaining us that, and what are the challenges for your library within the UN and so to implement those policies. Thank you.
Well, the UNESCO recommendations on open science that you're referring to was adopted by the UNESCO member states only last year, so 2021, and the development of these recommendations were actually really demanded by the member states because they wanted to have an international standard-setting instrument on open or for open science. So the idea was to have a clear definition or a document that clearly defines what open science is. As we've already heard before, Ali, you mentioned that it's not only about publications, but it's also research data, software, metadata, even hardware. So there are many things that really are included in open science or fall under the umbrella of open science. And of course, the idea of UNESCO was that, okay, there are many problems that we are facing on a global level that we have to solve somehow, and this can be done if, of course, using scientific approaches, and this has to be open so that we can really share this knowledge. So this is the idea. And what the UNESCO recommendations on open science contain is, on the one hand, a clear definition what open science is, but it also has concrete measures on open access, on open data, and how to kind of connect the general public, the citizens, to science. And also it aims to facilitate, to open up the production and dissemination process of scientific knowledge on a global scale. So this is basically what's included in that document. And I think it's a very, the UNESCO recommendations on open science is actually a very powerful tool because it is legally binding. That means that the member states have to implement these recommendations. And that means that this could also somehow affect their national laws. So that's really a very powerful tool. And as it comes to the ICTP, because we are, of course, also under UNESCO, and we want to also implement these recommendations. I don't want to say that it's easy for the ICTP, but I would say that it feels kind of natural. I would say that the ICTP has this spirit somehow kind of written into its DNA, I want to say, because one of our pillars of our mission is to help bridge the knowledge divide between the global north and the global south. This is exactly what this UNESCO recommendations are aiming at. So I think it's already there. ICTP has declared to do that, but of course the how to do that is a long way, right? So we have started with that. So there is a lot to do. And what we have started to do is to invest in diamond open access. We find that gold open access is a wonderful thing. It opens up science, but it's not going far enough because we, in our community, so we have lots of scientists from developing countries, least developed countries. Gold open access, unfortunately, is not enough because they can read science, but they cannot participate because paying APCs is simply not possible for them because they don't have the money for that. So the ICTP library also wants to fund and foster consortia like Scope 3. ICTP is a member of that. We also have started to fund smaller initiatives like SciPost and also foster this two-sided open access, or small initiatives for books, for example, with MIT Press Direct to Open. And also we have licenses with, for example, annual reviews that subscribe to open models. So we've started to go into that direction as well. So this really safeguarding this open infrastructure for high-class academic publishing is very important for us. And we have also started to organize a seminar series on open science together, so the library together with the ICTP STI unit. And we're inviting experts of the field and discuss also, of course, the ICTP community. And also the library has always had a donation program. So we were sending scientific literature to developing countries, and we're currently redesigning this program. So we're using the contacts that we have to our partners in the developing world or in the global south to invite them also to get them into this discussion. And these seminars, for example, are one of these examples where scientists from the global north meet scientists from the global south, and we discuss topics of open science. So this is what we have started to do. But of course, it's only a first step. So there are many things to do, and there are many challenges that we face. For example, building a technical infrastructure to offer these our high-class publications, our scientific output, for example, via the Greenway open access. We want to have a technical infrastructure that allows us not only to make open publications, but also to make open research data, also to make open open educational resources that are also included in the UNESCO recommendations, by the way. So also, for example, videos like on various lectures that we have. So this is a challenge. And one last thing that I want to mention is a very practical thing. The ICTP library is a kind of hybrid between, we are a UN library, but we're not a classical, typical UN library because we're more academic, we're more like a university library, but we of course have to conform to the whole procurement procedures given by the UN, by UNESCO. So we are in conflict here because we actually would like to enter a consortium, the Italian consortium Paricrui, where you have these big deals with Springer, for example, where you can read and publish open access, but this is simply not possible for administrative reasons. So this is really a very everyday basis, a very practical things that we are struggling with, and we'll have to find a solution for it in the future.
Okay. So thank you, Eva. We have seen, I mean, Maria, a lot of questions actually have been raised by Fabio, by Eva, by Giulia. So, I mean, different. I mean, I didn't even write them down, all of them, because it's too much. but I mean, diversity among different communities. Bottom-up or top-down measures and initiatives. Open access does really lower the costs of publishing or not. Open science will, how will impact also in that sense? I mean, I'm curious to have, or there is still a large fragmentation of infrastructure. I mean, that has been built so far. Fabio touched also the research assessment, the problem that is key, definitely. I mean, now Eva is mentioning even easy problem like sitting at the table with the publisher and having a deal done for the institute. So, I mean, I would like, before actually having your view as a publisher, I mean, as an expert of publisher, on this. I mean, you work now at EURAC Research. Also, EURAC Research is committed to open access. I would like also to have the view of EURAC Research on that. And so first I would like to ask you to mention what is the EURAC Research approach to open access and policy, let's say. And then if you can also touch at least some, you select the one that you find more meaningful of the problems that have been raised, with some examples that of things that in publishing or discussion that are taking place in publishing. And after that, I mean, if you have questions, we open to discussion with everybody.
Yes, okay. Starting from EURAC Research, which is a research institute in Bolzano. We certainly at the institutional level, we have a lot of awareness and attention for open access, both at the management level and also among the researchers. We have an open access policy since 2019, and we are now working toward also releasing a research data policy, research data and research software policy. Actually, this is in the works. It's a green policy, so it relies also on our institutional repository. We keep monitoring continuously what happens in the open access field. We evaluate the developments that are going on, and so far mostly they have come from Europe and the UK. We really in doing that, we also make sure that we keep our open access policy current. So every once in a while we go back to it and we revise it, really to make sure that it supports the researchers in what they have to do. We are, for example, at the moment discussing possible revisions to support them in their use of preprints, or register reports. Also to support them in responding to the zero embargo policy, which is a tricky thing for many of them. This is something that all Horizon Europe funding programs now, it comes from Plan S, and it's been taken up in the strictest form by Horizon Europe.
Perhaps you can say a word about Plan S as well, because I didn't actually mention, just a word, just to say.
Yes.
It was, I mean,
Fabio just mentioned it, so I thought maybe it's good to go into it. It's an initiative. There is a coalition of science funders behind it. They are about
12 countries.
17.
17? Okay,
Now,
I was behind.
Some have been added, I think. And their mission is to accelerate the transition to fully open. So they've put down a series of objectives and measures in place to sort of achieve these objectives. And also dates by which everything that they themselves fund should be fully open. And one of the things that is in this sort of in the Plan S, how can I say, not declaratives, in the Plan S plans, is the zero embargo. So it means that wherever it's published, subscription or not, the research papers funded by the institutions behind Plan S, and the European Commission is one of them, but there are many other national European funders also there, should be immediately available the moment the paper is published. So it doesn't mean that the paper itself has to be open access, but it means that at least there has to be a copy of it that is open access. So it could be, for example, the archive version, or it could be an author-accepted manuscript version that sits on an institutional repository. There are other interesting things in them. Maybe I'll touch upon them later.
Yeah.
That relate to what Fabio was saying. But just to close up a little bit on also important to add, this zero embargo policy has also been reiterated recently by the White House Office of Science and Technology policy, which is something that was released this summer, and that really follows the steps of the European Commission and the European sort of pan-European efforts toward opening access and opening science in general. And it recommends immediate access to the research, federally funded research, and also access to the data underlying the papers funded by these projects. So in this way, it's quite aligned. It's still a very high level memo. It will need some work to be put into actual policy, but it's a start that really shows they are taking a very similar road. Now, all these sort of policy developments influence our researchers' work, and this is where we sort of at the research support office, we come in and try to help them and support them. Not just, for example, we also we are now able to provide DOIs for the data sets that they publish.
DOIs means digital online identifier, and for those who don't know, so that is they identify uniquely something that is published.
Yes. Assigned DOIs are usually always assigned and make they enable online citability between papers. Now, DOIs are now also necessary for other objects like data sets that get shared. So now we have a facility through DataSite to assign DOIs to the data sets that our researchers put on the institutional repository. We also support them with things like ORCID. And we are really also expanding the focus since a few years from open access to open science much more generally. So helping them with their activities for data management, activities that have to do with participatory methods of research. And this is for us very important because EURAC Research is an applied research center. So it's the applications and the impacts that we are seeking have to have an application in the communities and in the environments that surround us. And this is, so for us, really a priority. And yeah, we have obviously some strong stimulus coming from the policies that are getting developed. It's undeniable.
I'm still curious to see from the more publishing point of view how would you, but not now. Before, I would like to ask actually if somebody in the room has some question. Because then we collect them and then we can close up because also time. We have sort of 12 minutes left, and so if you have some question in the audience, please do not hesitate to raise your hand. Andrea, perhaps you can come here and shout. I can shout here. Come here. I will happily. No, I'm sorry, I could join on the meeting only late, so I'm not sure whether you have touched already upon this. I wanted to know, what about the experiment of SciPost? No, it has been mentioned. It's not that we fully talked about it. Because you know, this is an experiment by a colleague, by the way. Yes, I know. And so can this be can be made? Let me summarize what SciPost is. SciPost is a new journal. I mean, new now is 5 years or even more. 5 to 7. No, it's 5 years. Roughly 5 years ago was last. And this initiative by a scientist, Jean-Sébastien Cox, who developed all the submission system and evaluation system. It's, I mean, to me, it's very much similar to the early JHEP. And the model of SciPost is to raise, I mean, institutional membership fees. That is he's sponsor, yeah. Asks Jean-Sébastien, goes around universities, gives talks, and then ask all universities like ICTP that wants to support, like CISA, of course, like CISA too, that wants to support this initiative to contribute. So this is just to say what SciPost is. No, then you don't pay. Of course. You don't pay the subscription. The referee reports are online if you want. So you can even add your name if you want. You know, it's all the highest possible level of transparency. Yeah. So this is just to explain what SciPost is. For me, I mean, the big question for me is we have seen with JHEP. This is something that I stressed at the beginning with JHEP. JHEP had at the very beginning a couple of people working for the journal, not more, and was having a few hundred papers. Now JHEP does publish something roughly 3,000 papers a year. And we have, not only with JHEP, also with other journals, we have 16 people working directly on journals. Now, the problem for me becomes scalability. And so if, I mean, for me, the challenge of Jean-Sébastien is to develop a scope 3, let's say, a model for the journal, for SciPost. So is it possible to have a scope 3 model that is many institutes coming together and supporting this journal, making it sustainable and scalable? And that is the big question mark. I don't know the answer. Actually, JHEP had to go through publisher and subscriptions before reaching that through scope 3, but eventually managed to do that. SciPost is not within scope 3 because it's nothing so far. It's just moving now into high energy fields, so it's not supported by scope 3. But I mean, the model should be something similar. The problem for me that makes it a question mark is that, as Fabio said, the high energy physics community is a very compact community, and there is CERN that is playing the hub role, which is crucial to have. Is it exportable to other, let's say, scientific community? In the statistical mechanics, in physics community, is it possible? It's much more diverse. You don't have one center that plays a hub role as plays in. But
some big institution like, so for example, Max Planck Society has this agreement with the DFK for the journal, which is called, now I don't remember, there's a
New Journal of Physics?
New Journal of Physics. And so, for example, so essentially, if you are a member of Max Planck Society, you don't pay anything. So they have a business model for that. For example, if they would instead support a foundation like SciPost, this could be already quite a substantial contribution to the running of the journal.
Definitely. It's definitely not
spoil the market of the publisher.
No, that is definitely the point.
So
but
but
I think this is perfectly. I mean, from my point of view, but I don't want to. But perhaps you can also comment on whoever wants to.
I think for me, I see the same, business ability, financing challenge, absolutely. The New Journal of Physics, for example, needed IOPP to take off. While Jean-Sébastien, I think, at least I met him some years ago, I don't know if he changed his mind, but he was very much of the idea that this should stay a grassroots effort. And, already IOPP is no more a grassroots organization. So this is one thing. I see scaling up from the authorship base also a big challenge. And this is something that I think also JHEP at the beginning, it took some years. But if you think about, this is really essential, finding a way to scale up, because For example, by the time that Scope 3 decided which were the essential journals they were going for to turn them open, already JHEP had a sufficient size to be included. So it's quality is the most important thing, but actually also scaling up in quantity is really essential for SciPost.
Maybe I can add briefly.
Please, Giulia. Yes.
The Max Planck Digital Library supports SciPost since 2018.
Yes. Who does support the SciPost?
Max Planck.
Yes, sure, sure.
Ah,
sure.
sorry, then I misunderstood what was said. I thought it was.
Andrea, did you know that Max Planck is a
I
supporter?
thought he was asking whether this is possible.
No, Andrea didn't know that Max Planck is supporting SciPost.
He's supporting SciPost, yes.
I have a very naive.
May I add something on
Yeah.
SciPost before we come to
sure.
Just I will try to be very brief. I've discussed SciPost with Jean Sebastian in a couple of occasions, and also with other colleagues who are editors of SciPost. I think it's a very interesting experiment. It reminds in some aspects of JHEP at the very beginning. And of course, being born in 2016, it introduces some further new elements of novelty. I mean, what's identical to JHEP at the beginning is that no cost for authors or for their institutions. And here I have the same reservations that were just expressed, that of course this can work until you are below a certain size, and then, okay, it will work if they are able to find sufficiently supporting agencies and institutes. The other aspect, I think, that needs some more time to be watched to understand whether it will be successful or not, is this innovative formula of the peer witness refereeing, where papers are in a sense not definitely accepted or refuted, and in addition to some appointed referees, also everyone else can comment upon the paper. This was also in the ideas of some of the proponents of JHEP, but was never implemented. I believe that in the community of statistical physicists or of high energy physicists, it can work, because there are communities where there is a good coherence, understanding of each other, also a sense of the quality of the elements constituting the community. I would like, maybe in some neighboring communities, it could also work. What I'm curious to see, what will happen when this is extended to more sparse and controversial communities, such as those in life sciences or in engineering or in other fields.
Alessandro,
Very naive
come
question.
closer so that.
Yes, very naive, possibly straight up ignorant question.
Yeah.
But yesterday, Federica mentioned that the global revenue around publishing is around $30 billion. 30 miliardi. 10 billion. Okay.
Right, 10.
That's still, that's quite a lot of money. So I looked up archive, and the archive budget is about 10 billion per year. 10 billion per year. Archive budget is around 3 million per year. Yeah. So there's like 10,000 archive worth of money in revenue in for-profit publishing. So since you're talking about scaling up, I understand there's a massive coordination problem, of course, because you have to switch. But how much of that is about research evaluation, and how much is research practice? Like bibliometrics and so on, research evaluation is based on traditional kinds of metrics. There is this massive coordination issue to moving, and this has financial impact, or is the other way around? I don't know if it's much.
So I understood the first part of the question, but not the last part. So, okay, can you repeat the last part?
So I assume, maybe I'm wrong, that part of the coordination problem from moving those money in transformative ways towards, let's say, diamond open access, has to do with research valuation. Of course, if I publish on Nature, the impact factor or whatever, it's more important for my funding agency. So how much of the difficulty promoting experiments like the CPOS comes from resistance due to research valuation, would you say, in your estimation? I know it's a very confused question, but I am very confused.
A lot of it.
Yeah, I agree. But,
Yeah.
So, I mean, so let me add something. So, archive is a repository of preprints. If you have 10,000 archives, you don't have the publish.
Yes.
You don't have, so that it's something different.
Yes.
There are interesting experiments, I think, that we didn't touch, that are the overlay journals. Overlay journals are journals where everything stays on archive. You don't make any, and there are some scientists that are the editorial board of a journal that is a virtual journal, and somehow makes the review of papers directly on archive and decide that the quality of those papers is good enough to be included in this journal. These are especially in mathematics. The first example I think is in mathematics. If I'm not
AP Sciences.
it is, yeah, I don't remember exactly.
There's a French startup that is actually trying to expand this, and it's an overlay model. It's very much at the beginning. The overlays that have been tried in the past have not really taken off. Now AP Sciences right now is the one that everyone is looking at as a potential winner.
I think this is an interesting experiment. It's an interesting experiment to my point of view. I don't know if Fabio or Giulia, you agree from the scientific point of view. If you agree, it's an interesting experiment. Those are overlay journals. What I want to stress, by the way, is another thing, is that for me, whenever I meet a scientist and I talk with him, an author of JHEP, and comes and has the chance to work with the editorial office at System Media, I want to be proud of everybody recognizes the huge support that they do receive from them. And that is work. Now, what is an overlay journal? Overlay journal is that you don't have such a support, otherwise you end up having a normal journal. Yeah. So while I think that, I mean, a lot has to do with very boring stuff for scientists, that is reminding colleagues that they have to send a review, that is making sure that the papers go through, it's like, I mean, for me, it's similar, but it's not the very same thing. It's like organizing a conference. I mean, a conference, the core of the conference are scientists. Of course, without scientists, it doesn't make sense to have any conference, and they do well. However, universities need administrative people that help and organizing the work of science. Scientists can do that work too. There's no problem. Actually, they can do even better from many aspects. However, they need to give up doing a bit of science in order to do that. So I think that it's easier to ask a person from the administration, can you please organize the dinner there? Can you please organize things there? And in journals, it's big, from my point of view, it's different. There are, there are differences, of course, but it's making sure that the DOI is assigned, that metadata are there, making sure that all things that are not science, hardcore science, but are important for the findability, for the citability, for the and this work has to has to be done, and somebody has to do it. For me, the point is, can we come up with ways that are much smarter to do that? And in that sense, Maria, you can finish.
I just wanted to add, complete this concept by saying that there are currently infrastructures that underpin peer review and publication, systems that have really evolved in time. They have become better and better because the publishers have worked on them to keep them up to date and to improve them. Now they have become pretty smooth, I would say, so much so that to many scientists, they are in the background and they're almost invisible and they take them for granted. So this is also to be remembered.
Yes. So to clarify, because I worry I came off as impolite or saying that journal, we should oppose journal stuff like that. I mean, in terms of financial resources, the market is very large, right? We can agree on that. I was just wondering, what's the most difficult part of taking that money that is already there and funneling it towards these more open initiatives? And I was wondering, especially research evaluation or career evaluation, how much of that is the friction?
Perhaps, Fabio, I ask you to because how much that is for science evaluation of Giulia issue, because that has to do with research evaluation, and you can have a say on that. I mean, you mentioned the reforming research assessment. So the publish or perish attitude that was also mentioned in Federica's podcast talk yesterday. So is there something that needs to be changed there from the academic point of view, and the way researchers should be evaluated and eventually promoted their careers?
I don't know whether Giulia wants to go first or...
Go ahead, Fabio, go ahead.
But Germany has also a lot of things to say in this respect, and Giulia in particular. But it's clear that starting from Italy, the country where I live and work, there are many things in research evaluation that don't work. For example, it's really stupid to have promotions to the professor role based on an abuse of bibliometric indicators that don't take into account whether you work in a collaboration of 4,000 people or you are building an instrument that takes 10 years to build, and then maybe you make a breakthrough with this instrument, but you don't publish a paper every week doing that work. So the present on the other hand, there are massive evaluations on the large institutions that for bibliometric scientific fields are probably better done with bibliometry than with peer review, because you don't find very well qualified peer reviewers to review thousands and thousands and thousands of papers. I remember once I was in a panel with Giorgio Parisi, and he convinced us that for certain things, bibliometric was better than peer review with convincing arguments. But having said that, we have to move, well, researchers, there is now this European movement towards research assessments. There are opportunities and dangers. Opportunities to move to a better peer review system that is that takes into account, that discourages the abuse of bibliometric indicators and takes into account that there is a variety of contributions to that can help evaluating the excellence of the quality of a research beyond publications, and especially the impact factor of the journals where they are published, or the collections they accumulate, or but there is also the need to focus the evaluation of research on the content of the research. If you introduce too much collateral elements in your judgment without sufficient care, you may end up creating reactions such as the reaction that gave birth to the ERC, that in some classes of European programs, the collateral criteria were so abused that the emphasis on the excellence of the researchers and on their projects was secondary. And so there was this reaction that brought to a program where the only things that are allowed to be evaluated are the excellence of the researcher and the excellence of the project. So if this project, it depends on the environment where this reform is implemented. There are countries such as the Netherlands where essentially they are already very much ahead in moving away from abuse of bibliometric indicators and doing a fair qualitative assessment of the research. There are other countries that have a lot of steps to make, and there is this danger. My institution joined this coalition for reforming research assessments, being aware of the risks, but also taking into account that this time it seems to me to be a more widespread effort involving also more scientists, more universities, more academic institutions as before. But I know, for example, that in Germany they have a more skeptical aptitude, and so far they are reluctant. So perhaps Giulia can explain to us why. I would be interested to hear it, because I have also some reservations.
So do you understand what you meant? In Germany is more reluctant towards
joining the coalition on reforming research assessment. I know, I look at the list of institutions that join. The FG joined, but I don't see any major German university having joined that coalition.
Yes. Okay, I would say in Germany there are various opportunities for funding, really very many, and each of them like to have their own independence in the assessment. And this is maybe part of the problem why there was no major step in that direction. In the end, so funding in Germany is also very complicated. It's very abundant, but it's very diverse. There are very many possibilities. So one needs to look at the system very closely. But to some extent, I think also different, the mechanisms are very different, and each funding source is, I think they thought a lot about the system, and they are not so willing to change that. And I believe that in Germany, this works also pretty well, I have to say. So bibliometric component is really not very dominant in the German evaluations, I would say.
So actually, we are over time. And so I think we can close it here. Of course, we couldn't, it's very hard on such a topic to come with conclusions or any, but we hope that at least it became clear what is ongoing in the publishing, let's say, landscape, what has been happening in the last 20 years, and what is open access, and what are the opportunities, but what are also the challenges ahead of us. So with this, I thank you for your patience, and I close this session. But, and Nico now is not anymore here, he was here. Where is Nico? Because I told him before, I will let you close the 3 days workshop, but now he's not here anymore. So if Nico comes back, we will have the pleasure and the honor of closing these 3 days that have been very enriching for me and very inspiring. And but I let the host say the last word. I mean, I'm not the so. Okay.